Right now, somewhere in your kitchen, there's a box with a nutrition label on it. Grams of protein, grams of fiber, a percentage of your daily value. You didn't invent this obsession with counting what goes into your body. Your ancestors had it too. They just didn't have labels. They had something far more dangerous, a wrong guess. Before farming existed, before wheat fields and rice paddies, before a single seed was ever planted on purpose, humans ate something you'd barely recognize as food. And the real answer to what they actually ate is far stranger than meat and berries. Start with the myth. You've probably heard the phrase paleo diet. Lean meat, some vegetables, maybe a handful of nuts. Clean, simple, almost noble. But that picture is mostly modern marketing wearing an animal skin. For most of human history, roughly 200,000 years before agriculture began around 12,000 years ago, your ancestors weren't hunting mammoths every day. They couldn't. Big game was rare, dangerous, and often seasonal. So what filled the gap? Bugs, roots, underground tubers you'd need a digging stick just to find. Anthropologist Richard Wrangham, in his research on early human diets, argued that the shift toward cooked starchy foods, not meat, may have been the real trigger behind human brain growth. Not a steak, a root vegetable, softened by fire. Here's a question worth sitting with. If your brain grew because of a boiled tuber, what does that say about the story you've been telling yourself about your ancestors as fierce, meat-driven hunters? Insects were not a fallback food. In many regions, they were a primary one. Termites, grubs, locusts, all high in protein and fat, all far easier to catch than a gazelle. Researchers studying modern hunter-gatherer groups like the Hadza of Tanzania have documented insects and honey making up a significant portion of caloric intake, sometimes rivaling meat itself. Honey deserves its own moment here. The Hadza don't just eat honey, they follow a bird for it. A small bird called the honeyguide has, for thousands of years, led Hadza hunters directly to wild beehives, guiding them through calls and flight patterns. In exchange, the humans crack open the hive, take what they need, and leave the rest, wax and larvae included, for the bird. Biologist Claire Spottiswoode has spent years documenting this relationship, describing it as one of the only known examples of a wild animal cooperating this precisely with humans for mutual benefit. Your ancestors weren't eating alone. They were eating in partnership with the animals around them. Now picture the coast. Not the savanna you always imagine, actual coastline, tide pools, shallow water. Archaeological sites in South Africa, particularly Pinnacle Point, show evidence of humans harvesting shellfish over 160,000 years ago. Mussels, clams, whatever the tide left behind. This wasn't survival food. Researcher Curtis Marion has argued this coastal diet, rich in omega-3 fatty acids, may have played a critical role in supporting the kind of brain development that led to modern human cognition. Which means the story of human intelligence might not start on the plains at all. It might start at the shoreline, with someone crouched over a tide pool prying open a shell with a rock. Fruit mattered too, but not the fruit you know. Wild fruit was smaller, tougher, often sour, sometimes barely edible without processing. A wild banana back then had almost no usable flesh and was packed with hard seeds. The sweet, seedless banana in your kitchen is a human-engineered creation, cultivated and refined over thousands of years of selective breeding. Here's the twist. Nearly everything sweet, soft, and convenient in your diet today didn't exist in that form until humans manipulated it into being. Meat, when your ancestors got it, was rarely a clean kill. Scavenging played a larger role than most people assume. Paleoanthropologist Robert Blumenshine's research on early hominins in East Africa suggests that early humans may have relied heavily on scavenging carcasses left by larger predators, cracking open bones for marrow that other animals couldn't access. Marrow, not muscle, may have been one of the earliest reliable fat sources available. Think about that. Before spears, before organized hunting parties. Some of your earliest ancestors were essentially opportunistic scavengers, waiting their turn at a carcass, then breaking bones apart for the fat hidden inside. That doesn't sound like the noble hunter from the documentaries, does it? It sounds more like patience, timing, knowing exactly when it was safe to move in. Diet also depended entirely on where you lived, and that variation was extreme. In the Arctic, populations like the Inuit historically survived on diets that were almost entirely animal-based: fish, seal, whale blubber, with barely any plant food available for much of the year. In equatorial regions, diets leaned heavily toward plants, tubers, fruit, and insects, simply because that's what was there. There was no single paleo diet. There were hundreds of them, shaped entirely by geography, season, and whatever the local environment was willing to give up. Seasons changed everything. Late summer might mean abundance, fruit ripening, fish running upstream. Late winter often meant scarcity. Thin animals, bare trees, stored fat becoming the difference between surviving and not. Your body's tendency to crave fat and sugar during stress or scarcity isn't some modern flaw. It's an inherited survival response from a time when that craving kept people alive through lean months. So here's a question that might land differently now. When you reach for something sweet after a hard day, is that really a failure of willpower? Or is it a few 100,000 years of programming doing exactly what it evolved to do? Fermentation existed too, long before anyone understood bacteria. Fruit left too long. Milk left too long, once dairy animals entered the picture. Early humans likely consumed naturally fermented foods without fully realizing why they didn't get sick from them, only that some spoiled foods seemed to keep them alive rather than harm them. That accidental discovery eventually shaped everything from yogurt to beer. Then agriculture arrived, and this is where the story takes its sharpest turn. You'd assume farming meant better food, more reliable, more abundant. In many ways, it was the opposite. Bioarchaeologists studying skeletal remains from the transition to farming have found a consistent pattern. Heights actually decreased in many early farming populations compared to their hunter-gatherer ancestors. Diets narrowed. Instead of eating dozens of different wild plants, insects, and animals across a season, early farmers often relied heavily on just one or two staple crops: wheat, barley, rice, depending on the region. Fewer nutrients, less variety, more vulnerability to famine if a single crop failed. That's the counterintuitive twist most people never hear. Agriculture wasn't a nutritional upgrade, it was a trade. Humans gave up dietary diversity in exchange for a food supply they could control and store. It made larger populations possible, it just didn't necessarily make each individual healthier. Which brings you back to your kitchen, that box with the nutrition label. Funny thing is, your ancestors were reading labels too, just written in taste, texture, and consequence instead of ink. A bitter plant probably meant toxins. A rotten smell probably meant danger. Fat and sweetness probably meant rare, valuable calories worth chasing. You still carry those same instincts today, buried under thousands of years of supermarkets and vending machines. Your craving for something salty or sweet after a long day isn't weakness. It's an ancient signal, still firing in a world that no longer requires it to keep you alive. Tonight, when you open your fridge and glance at another label, remember that hunger has always come with instructions. Your ancestors just had to read them without knowing how to read.